Welcome to Myers House. My name is Brenda Hattie, and I'm really excited to have this opportunity to present to you about my house. And many thanks to the Heritage Trust of Nova Scotia and Gabriele and Carter for coming to help put this together. So I like to call this house my magnificent obsession because of its history in our family, and we lost it for a little while, so I'm really excited to have it back. So I'll give you a little bit of background of how I ended up here. In 2018, I was finishing my doctorate at the Mount, and I was at a family barbecue, and a cousin of mine came up to me and said, "Guess what's on the market?" And he showed me his phone. And yeah, this is what he showed to me, was this house for sale in Salmon River Bridge, and it's our family home. So I was really excited. We were all excited, but at the time, I was just not in a position to really think about buying a house, and neither was anybody else in my family. So I said, "That's really lovely," and went home and just thought, I'm not going to do anything more about this. But it kind of nagged at my mind a little bit, and I would keep checking online, and the house wasn't selling. It wasn't selling, and October came along. So I called my real estate agent and I said, "You know, my family home has come up on the market and I'd really like to see it. Maybe we should drive out." So he met me out here, and I came into the house, walked around, and it was really amazing to be here. I had not been in the house since I was 14 years old, when my great aunt, the last one who had been born in this house, had passed away. So it was really a very interesting feeling to be here again after all that time. The last time would have been around 1993. So I thought about this place. I was here for maybe an hour, and then I just thought, I don't know what to do. So I got in the car and I started to drive back home, and I was about 1 kilometer down the road, and I really had a very strong impression that I really had to buy this house. So I got back home and started to put things in motion. I had to continue my doctorate, so I didn't move from Eastern Passage where I was living. I bought the house and then rented it out right away until I figured out what I would be doing. So I'll give you a little bit of background on this house. My family belongs to or descends from the Myers family of Jeddore, which is a very old settler family from the area that arrived in the 1700s. And the genealogy about this family, you can find it online actually. If you just Google the Myers family of Jeddore, you'll find this. And it was actually requested by the Nova Scotia Museum. This curatorial report was completed by Deborah Trask in 1988, sorry. And it was completed because they were finishing the Fisherman's Life Museum, which is just up the road, as a part of the Nova Scotia Museum complex. So they wanted the history of the family that lived in that house. So that's why this report was completed. And as you can see in the slides, this house looks very much like the Fisherman's Life Museum because both houses were built by the same brothers. So the Myers house is an example of balloon construction in the example of the Classic Revival style. Classic Revival style is based on the forms and decorations of ancient Greek and Roman buildings, but was greatly simplified when used in the design of working class housing in Nova Scotia. And so you can see from this slide that this house had a Victorian veranda, and you can see all that styling around the top. You can't see it on the bottom in this photograph because of the shrubs and plants that are around the house, but it also has some beautiful detail around the bottom, but you'll see that in future slides. Other character-defining elements of this house are that it's a 1.5-story height. It has gable roof with returns, wood shingle siding, a summer kitchen addition, as I mentioned earlier. The window lengths and locations are also typical of the time. And of course, the location and form of the front porch is very typical design of the time, but in this photograph, as you can see, the Victorian veranda, the detail has been removed by a former owner. So this house was built by my great-grandfather, James William Myers, so that he and his wife, Eliza Ann Mitchell, could move in and have a family, which they did in 1884. So 11 children were born in this house, amongst them 3 sets of twins, as I mentioned earlier, my grandmother being one of the sets of twins. So the children were born between 1883 and 1901. And so in this report, my family is on page 14. So in terms of how the house was handed down in the family, it was first bequeathed to my great aunts, my great grandmother's daughters, Nora and Annie and Leah, none of whom married. And so they lived here with their mother. And then Nora bequeathed the house to my grandmother's oldest son, my Uncle Jack, who then bequeathed it to his daughter Carolyn. She then had to sell the house because she was moving to the United States. So the house was sold out of the family after being in our family for 110 years in 1993. And then I reclaimed it in 2018. This is one of the oldest photographs that we have in our family. And you can see in the background there's also an outbuilding, a barn that went with the property. And you can really see the styling of this house in this photograph. So this is the earliest photograph of the family, sat on the front porch out here before the vestibule was added on. And so down the center of the photograph, you can see the 3 sets of twins, starting at the top with Amos on the left and Elma on the right. Then my grandmother Plessa on the left and her twin Leah. And then at the bottom, the youngest twins, Clara and Clarence. The first child had died, so in the end, there were 10 children that were raised in this house. Now, the reason that we have so many photographs in our family is that the boy in the back there, Amos, on the left, grew up to be very interested in photography. So he took extensive photographs of this house, and the family and events in and around the house, and of the Eastern Shore, many locations in the Eastern Shore throughout his time. And so we're really fortunate, and I had no issue doing the background research for the house so that it could be designated. This is one of the many photographs taken of the family and some friends on the front porch here. And to the far right, you see my Aunt Nora, and right next to her in the back on the veranda with her arms on the banister there, or on the railing, sorry, is my grandmother, Plessa, and then a brother and a few sisters. The little girls, some of them belong actually to the couple that raised the family in the Fisherman's Life Museum. So there were 13 girls in that family, and those are some of the girls who were cousins, of course, to my grandmother and her sisters and brothers. This is another photo taken in 1915 by Amos Myers, my Uncle Amos. And this is a family gathering on the front porch with some friends. And on the far right, you see my great-grandmother, Eliza Mitchell Myers. And the girl over, third one in there, past my great-grandmother, is my grandmother, Plessa. Her twin, Leah, is over on the far left there. And this is another gathering that happened again in front of the house. So Amos would take photographs every time the family came together, and they often did things like family picnics in and around the property and so on. And you can tell this is in the early 1900s by the dress that you see here, the clothing styles. And this is the only winter photograph that we have in our family of the house. And over there on the far left, you see my great uncle James. He was the youngest boy, and he was born actually after his father died in a sawmill accident just up the road here. And so he's about 13, 14 in this photograph, and he's standing in the middle of the number 7 highway, such as it was, cutting wood. So this is a lovely photograph, and it was actually used by the Memory Lane to create Christmas cards this year. This photograph was taken in what is now my bathroom, but was the parlor. And my grandmother, this is my grandmother, Plessa. She married John Wilkinson, and she's sitting here in front of the organ with her firstborn son, Jack, who would inherit the house. And one of the interesting things about this whole room, and again, this was taken by Amos, this photograph, is that it was the scene of a lot of shots, a lot of portraits that my uncle took, because the lighting is really perfect in that room for taking portraits. So this is just one of many portraits taken in this room of the various sisters and of one of the brothers before he went off to World War I. Moving along, this photograph was taken in 1929, and on the front lawn you see a little girl on the right. That's my mother, and she was around 4 years old there. And next to her are her two brothers, Jack and Charlie, with the family cat, I believe. And along the bottom of this photograph you can see a rock wall. I'll talk about that in a little bit. But yeah, just take note of that rock wall there. And on the far right, you see an apple tree that is actually still there to this day. One of the things you'll notice in these photographs is that the gardens start morphing and changing over time. As my great aunts grew older, it turns out they loved gardening and they became very good at it. So you'll notice the garden shift and change now quite a bit over the next number of slides. And again, I call your attention to the rock wall that's running along the bottom of this photograph. In those days, the road, is flush with, or, the rock wall is built on top of. The road is right next to it, but now the number 7 highway, when it was put in, was raised up. So the profile has actually changed in terms of how you see this rock wall these days. This photograph was taken in 1934. My grandmother, grandfather, and the children had returned from Scotland, where they had been living for a few years. My grandfather was from Scotland, from Glasgow. So this photograph was taken again by Uncle Amos in the back field behind my house, and you see, the Jeddore Harbor in the background there, and my house, and right next to it on the left is the barn, just peeking out around the edge there. That's currently now across the road still. And you see a little girl over there on the right, and that's my mother picking flowers. She was around 9 years old. She really loved being in the field and picking flowers. So they were visiting my great-grandmother. And this is a close-up shot that Amos took of my mother when she was picking flowers that day. This is another photo that I really like. Again, it was taken by Uncle Amos. And you see the house there on the right, but on the left, this is one of the very few shots where you actually see a picture of my great-aunt's store / tea room and gas bar. So it was a little shop that she opened up, Leah. So it belonged to my grandmother's twin, Leah. And she served tourists. So you might not be able to make out, but there is a gas pump there. And then inside was like a little store, but also it was run like a little cafe. So you could stop in there and you could gas up and have a cup of tea and a sandwich or soup. And but there was also candy for kids and other things. And again, if you look right behind the store, you'll see my barn that's still there to this day, but the shop is gone. So I have yet to do a little bit of research on the history of that store. On the right, you see my grandfather's car parked out front there. And I just bring note to the rock wall that's now going up to the back, toward the back of the field. That wall is still there, but it's now on my neighbor's property. Eventually, my Aunt Roxy, who grew up here, would marry and move into a little house next door that's still there. And my next door neighbor is actually a distant cousin of mine. This photo was taken in 1938, again, another family gathering. And on the left, you see my grandfather in the fedora. And then the young woman with her arms on the railing there is my mother. She's about probably 14 or 15 years old there. And you see my great-grandmother there in black, Eliza, and right next to her on the right is my grandmother. And around them are some great aunts, the next generation, cousins, one of my uncles, and so on. This photo, the next photo, was taken in the 1940s, around 1944, and you see my grandfather sitting there with his fedora on, and right next to him, kind of leaning against him, is my mother, Nan. And in the back is my grandmother smiling over the top of Granddad's fedora. And then right next to Mom is Aunt Nora, who lived in the house with her sister, Annie, at that time. So yeah, this was taken around 1944, 1945. And I like to call the next photograph Uncle Jack Photobomb, because somebody was taking a photograph of the house in the 1960s and my uncle walked through the shot. So of course he inherited the house from Aunt Nora. So yeah, this is kind of a nice early spring, it looks like, photograph when the snow is still on the ground. And again, you can see the outdoor privy to the right. You can see the back porch that used to be on the house there, where they used to store their wood and gardening supplies, and where we used to hang up our coats and take off our galoshes before we went into the kitchen. And on the other side, you see the house that my great aunt Roxy lived in after the war. So eventually, my Aunt Roxy would have a house here, and my grandmother would have a house right next door. And those three houses are still here. Yeah. So in the next shot, this next photograph is the first color photograph that I actually have of the house. And you can see that it has a really lovely red roof at this point, and you can really see the Victorian detail on the veranda. And by now the gardens have been really developed and worked on, and you can see the snow and summer coming down over the rock wall. It was really a gorgeous garden, so much so that the Chronicle Herald came out and did a story about the gardens and featured this, the house and the gardens, on the front page of one of the issues. My cousin has a photograph, has the newspaper clipping about that, and he's trying to find that now. And this is another really lovely color shot of the house, more towards the fall, as you can tell by the lighting. But again, even so, the garden is still in great shape. And it has a lovely boxwood there on either side of the pathway going up to the house. So restoring the gardens is something that I also plan to do, and I've already begun work on that. By this time, of course, by the 60s, a driveway had been put in. So you now see the driveway there, which wasn't there originally. So as I said early on, the house was not in great shape when I bought it, and you can see here it's looking pretty bedraggled and run down. So I had a lot of work to do to address some of the issues. So I began bringing around me a team of people that I knew could help me with this. Now, a central person in this has been my brother, who owns John Hattie Atlantic Home Designs Limited. So John is a home designer, so he was the one who with me went through the house and decided what we needed to do to restore the house. And of course I was going to need an electrician, carpenters, insulators. The house did not have insulation when I bought it, so that was one of the first things that I set about doing. And then a number of family and friend carpenters and laborers, and of course myself. So I began right away by applying for heritage status for this house, which I was able to get last August in 2020 after lockdown, so COVID-19 lockdown, so that was really gratifying. But in the meantime, while I was waiting for that designation, or hoping for it, because it wasn't guaranteed, of course, I set about doing the insulation. So here you see the insulation is being done all around the house, and was done in the roof as well, was done at the time. So that was done in the winter of 2018, because the house was blowing through propane and costing a fortune for heat. And yeah, the designation for the property came through in August 2020. So I carried on with the major repairs that needed doing. And one of the first things that I had to do was replace the rotting entry to the basement. There's a lot of moisture that really collects around the back of the house because I'm on a grade and the water comes down, and there are a couple of springs, underground springs and so on. So the first thing we did was replace the entry to the basement and work on the rotting sills along the bottom of the back of the house and to the side here, going around the corner. And then we installed proper drainage in that so that we wouldn't have problems with moisture the way we have been having. So that's all been completed. That was done in November. And the other thing that I did was have the floors reinforced down in the basement. One of the interesting things about this house, like a lot of old houses, is it's made to allow water to come into the basement. So there are 5 drains along the rock wall downstairs. So water does drain in, there's sort of like a little ditch around the exterior, and it drains out to the corner over here under the rock wall. So if you listen, you can hear water running in the basement. It happens all the time. It freaks some people out, but I'm used to it. We grew up with that. And yeah, so it carries on. Now, one of the things I've had done is that the basement walls have been insulated with closed cell foam right up to the headers. So now that's all insulated, which has really cut down on moisture there. So having sold my house in Eastern Passage right after lockdown and moved out here, I started doing the work right away, or continued the work I'd started even back in 2018 after I bought the house. So I had to really pay quite a bit for the insulation, of course. So that was $12,000 just for that. But thankfully, with Efficiency Nova Scotia, I ended up with around $3,000 in rebate. The new roof on the summer kitchen and veranda I had to have that replaced because there were leaks in the kitchen, and also there were some leaks in the vestibule, so I had to deal with that. I had French drains installed in the back field, further up in the field, to divert water away from the foundation, and that cost around $3,000. Repairing the rotting sills and the external entry to the basement, reinforcing the walls, cost around $6,000. And there's other, like what I like to say, miscellaneous stuff. So right away, I had to sink quite a bit of capital from the house sale, my house sale in Eastern Passage, into the house right away. But thankfully, I'm almost at the end of that, and things are looking much better and feeling much better. So you can see that it's looking much nicer, and I have started in on working on the gardens here. So I'll just show you a few photographs so you can get a sense of that. I reinstalled gardens that were always here along the front part of the house and started planting some heritage plants, and reinstalled a rose bush, which there was also a really magnificent rose bush on the front lawn in the old days. In fact, in the old days, there really wasn't a lawn. It was all garden. So this summer I will really start in earnest on the gardens. Okay, so back to the rock wall. When I bought the house, this is what the rock wall looked like. It was barely discernible under the vegetative overgrowth here. So over a 2-week period, I started excavating, and it became almost like an archaeological dig. It was so deeply impacted and stuck with vegetation. So I had a pickaxe and various other tools, and basically was on my hands and knees in front of this wall for 2 weeks until I finally was able to dig it out. And as you can see, it's looking a lot better there. So the next piece will be reinstalling gardens all along the top wall there. So most of the really challenging pieces and expensive pieces of the work have been done at the house, and she's looking really good now. And I have continued to have gatherings here according to COVID rules. So we had Halloween for the first time in this house for many, many years. And I made sure that I really tarted the place up. And happily, there were kids that came by. So it was really exciting to just see the house lit up again and enjoying people. Christmas, I had, again, gatherings with my bubble friends, as the term is these days. And so the interior is coming along really nicely and has even shifted since this photograph was taken at Christmas time. And you see bits of the Christmas tree over there on the left. And I have had a couple of small pride gatherings at the house as well. So it has been socially busy in the ways that we could be under the COVID health rules. And this is a really nice shot taken by my neighbors when they were out kayaking early one morning. So you can really see the house is looking very, very grand up there. And you can see the barn, and that's my next project. So the barn is on the house property. It's a second lot. And the barn was used by the family for storage for Aunt Leah's tea room, but also for the fishing boat and for a lot of their supplies and tools and so on. So the barn was in pretty poor shape. The floor was falling in. We got it just in time. So again, with my brother's help, we planned the restoration and began a demo very carefully in the interior of the barn. And then last year, we reinstalled the floor and the subfloor and the loft floor. I plan to turn it into a studio loft, a creative space, but also partly a meeting space and an office space for me, as well as hopefully artist in residence programs that are in the works out here on the Eastern Shore. And I can't talk about the work that I've been doing here without talking about a huge team of people that have been around me. My family is so excited about the restoration of this place. So in the guy in the front there is my brother John, who is a huge supporter, and like I say, he has all the expertise that's been a real help. And these are some family members and friends who have been helping, some on the barn. And then, yeah, here's a list because I really think it's important to name them. John Hattie, Michelle Riggs of Riggs Electrical has helped me with the electrical around this place and the barn. Andrea Doncaster Engineering, Sonia Callie and Worldwide Insulators, Edgar and his son Ryan Kerr, who have been carpenters who really know how to do historic work on houses. Darrell Wood, another carpenter who again knows how to do that kind of historic work. Dennis DeBay, who insulated the basement. And also the research. I've been helped out by Carm Robertson, a colleague and friend of mine who used to work at the Nova Scotia Archives. And Carm has helped me find some information we needed from the archives, Nova Scotia Archives and all their staff. And of course the Heritage Advisory Committee, HRM Heritage Advisory Committee, who has been on board and supported, as well as the council. So big shout out to everybody who's helped, and I owe you a huge debt of thanks. So yeah, that's the end of my presentation. It's been a thrill to talk to you about my house, but of course it's a journey that continues, and I'll continue to be as obsessed about this house and the gardens and the barn, so you can check back with me about the barn next year. All right, thanks everybody.